All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you here. This is the live version of the Fundraising Superheroes podcast, a show we produce here at Driven, where we have candid conversations with nonprofit professionals on topics around fundraising, marketing, and so much more. If you're interested in learning more about our podcast, we have all the links available to you after the webinar today. So as we begin to adjust to a post-COVID life, many people are preparing to get back to work in person or adopt a hybrid model of working. But there's still a lot of questions surrounding our volunteers. How can we make a hybrid model work and be successful in all aspects of our organization? So today we're going to talk with Lori. Lori is an amazing volunteer consultant with over 20 years of experience in the industry. She's a contributing author of the Volunteer Management Handbook, second edition, as well as having numerous articles published in both print and online. Lori Gotlieb is a recipient of the Linda Buchanan Award for Excellence. Buchanan. That word always trips me up. in volunteer management, and in addition to all of the above, she built and taught Humber's volunteer management and leadership program. So Lori is more than qualified to be here today, and I'm so excited to have her with us to discuss how you can successfully transition your volunteer management program into a hybrid model. So thank you, Lori, for joining us.
My pleasure, Sabrina.
So can you start us off by just talking about what a hybrid model is and what it looks like in an organization?
Sure. The traditional definition of a hybrid model is where you work within the parameters of both being face-to-face, so on-site as well as off-site. So it gives you the flexibility and the ability to pivot depending on what the project is that you're doing, and or in this particular case, whether offices are open or offices are closed. You know, we're not post-pandemic yet. We're definitely still in the pandemic. People are going back to offices. Nonprofits were heavily affected by the pandemic. They were shut down. Volunteer programs were completely shut down. They're just starting to move up, into this hybrid model. It gives you the ability to switch over depending on what the environment's looking like too. So, the positive of having a hybrid model is that it allows you the flexibility to move back and forth. It doesn't require a lot of staff because people are working off-site. It is an ability to move into more skill-based volunteers. I mean, the downside of it, it does limit your physical capabilities in terms of doing large events. For example, food donations, which have moved into an in-person model, still have to have less people helping out. So it takes longer to do things. But having the hybrid model will allow you to think both strategically, open up new opportunities as well, because people who do not want to go into the office have the ability to work without geographical barriers, and therefore, can take an hour out of their day to edit some materials, to tutor somebody, to mentor somebody, and it's not really affecting their travel time and all those other things. So I love the idea of a hybrid model. The issue becomes planning for it. So right now, the hybrid models that we're working with are very much reactive. And I think that one of the lessons learned out of this webinar is you have to plan for it. So there needs to be a strategic plan to be able to build your foundational volunteer program, but also build a hybrid model. And we'll talk a little bit about it later, where you have your resources online. You can't just move to a virtual and not have the accompanying resources be virtual as well. So you can't ask a volunteer to come in and do interviewing, training, orientation, and then send them off, to go and work off site, because the whole concept of the virtual side is that they're not physically exposed to an environment they're not comfortable to be in. The other positive of a virtual or hybrid model is that there's more transparency. There's more materials and resources that are available to people on the website or on a hub. It's also in some ways easier to track volunteers, because you can access more volunteers through an email, through them doing their own timesheets, those types of things. So um, I think the hybrid model is here to stay. I kind of hope it is. I'd say probably going back almost 10 years when technology was really taking over, I was hoping and praying that organizations would develop this hybrid model. It's unfortunate that COVID brought about this virtual concept, under emergency purposes where it could have been planned in a much better way. But I'm happy to see that this virtual side of volunteering is taking hold and hopefully will be here for the long run.
Yeah, when we first were talking almost over a year ago, we had an interview on the podcast when COVID just started about volunteer management. And, you're saying a lot of the same things. It was kind of a necessary change, but has brought so many opportunities now because you can reach broader audiences. There's more flexible volunteering options. I know for me, travel was a big thing, and now I'm able to help virtually online, which has allowed me to, manage my time better. So I'm curious, what are some other benefits that you've noticed from having this digital kind of model of volunteering?
Okay, so first of all, there's kind of like this elephant in the room also that, there are people that don't want to be vaccinated. And, that is limiting them as to where they can go and what they can do. So, one of the benefits of having this digital volunteer base is that gets removed. So that's a benefit for people that are struggling with that, moral, ethical, physical decision as to whether they vaccinated, whether they have the vaccines. They're people who are compromised. So, one of the benefits of going digital is that you remove all those health concerns. So it brings back, especially the older population and the younger population. It opens up volunteer opportunities that could still be shut down. Like we're in this, sixth wave. I don't think we're done yet. So, it allows people to get back into some semblance of helping out in a way that they couldn't. And, in terms of like my mother was just telling me yesterday that she's thinking about volunteering again. Like she couldn't do it because she couldn't physically go into a building anymore. So, that's one of the benefits. Another thing is there's so much creative opportunity here when you go into a digital volunteer model. Okay, so let's start with the basics. You have access to people you never would have access to. There are no geographical barriers, which means that if you want somebody to teach somebody a new language, why can't you go to France to do it? So you're removing all those geographical barriers. You're allowing opportunity for partnerships from organizations that are from different countries, different cities. I'm starting to see those kinds of partnerships and collaborations between different organizations that aren't even in the same city. You shift to, so here's a little bit of a, I guess, positive, negative. You shift to more of a skill-based volunteer model. So what I mean by that is where you had, events or things that just required the physical body. Unfortunately, when you go into the virtual space and the digital space, you are looking more at skills and how people can bring their skills to their volunteer model. And I'll talk a little bit about what kinds of things that can happen. But the other thing is the new generation, the younger generation, even like all generations have moved to digital. So they're on their phone 24/7. They're getting their news, they're getting their education, they're getting their training, they're getting their social life. Everything's being done digitally. So there is a very quick turnaround to get volunteers. So you don't even have that. You kind of remove that long term, from first contact to interview to placement to like that period of time gets removed. You can actually bring volunteers in very quickly to do things. And we'll talk a little bit about like the I guess the best practices. There's so many things that you can do. So an example, I was seeing that Baycrest has started. Baycrest is a hospital senior dealing with aging. It's got a hospital. It also has an apartment building co-ops. Sorry, a little bit of a brain fog. And they've started this program, an intergenerational program, where they have actually partnered up with both a camp as well as a school, and they are calling it Pan Buddies, like pandemic buddies. And they've started this both fashion, like friendship, as well as mentorship, intergenerational stories. There's opportunities to do writing and editing that you didn't have available to you. So there are a lot more volunteers that are managing newsletters, blogs, vlogs, all those types of things. The whole art and design and all those things are available, that you don't physically have to, have people there. You can have people that are doing art and graphic designing and all those things for you virtually. And again, no geography. I've noticed that there's a uptake in teaching, education, and training volunteers, because now that you have Zoom and other platforms, you can actually keep volunteers engaged virtually. So again, that whole digital age allows people to get learnings faster and more depth. They're also more engaged with organizations. I find that they're becoming more ambassadors to organizations because they're feeling a real connection to the organization now. So there's a lot of positives for going into the digital space, but volunteer programs have to think strategically. They have to come up with great roles that can sustain, long term, but be more project based. So that's the other thing, is people don't want this long-term volunteering. They want to go more into project to project. So there's a lot of benefits, and I've seen a lot of successful activities happening. A lot of third party, where grassroots organizations are connecting to communities that are doing things like fundraising, gathering product. I mean, we can see what's going on right now with Ukraine, with Russia and Ukraine war, where all different neighbors are using technology, Facebook, Instagram, to gather product, and it's coming fast and furiously. And they're able to help out by using the digital world, which I think that if it was being managed by a volunteer program physically on site, it would be a lot more checks and balances, crossing T's, dotting I's. So I think the benefit of the digital world and the ability for the digital volunteer base is that you can get very quick access to them when you have to do these special kinds of things.
Yeah, that is a huge benefit. Just like how quick it is. But we mentioned, and this was you mentioned in a talk we did before in the podcast, that there is like a lot of unorganized volunteering coming out of the digital space. And that does, it provides a benefit to respond quickly, but it also means that, things aren't being managed as well as it would be in a formal volunteer setting. So do you think that's going to be a challenge for organizations to kind of compete with that?
I do. And I think that, you hit the nail on the head. The nonprofits are trying to slowly figure out where they're going to be in the next couple of years. And the community is going, we're not waiting for you. We're just going to go do it. So I think that there needs to be an alignment within a nonprofit. First of all, within the organization, there's also a lot of turnover happening right now. A lot of people are leaving jobs. There's a lot of change. And I think historically nonprofits move very slowly. I think they have to move faster. I think they need to, if you need to bring in somebody to kind of help you build the project and then let you do it, then that may be money well spent. But I think that they need to look at, and specifically volunteer programs need to step up. And I've argued this 1,000 times. Step up and come up with a plan on how you can engage your community. So move from that traditional model of these are the 5 things that we have volunteers do, to what is going on and how can we assist the community. So have that flexibility, and maybe for the short run, like I said, as we're dealing with right now, the crisis in Ukraine, as well as the crisis, we're still people back at home and delivering food and those types of things. Nonprofits should be reaching out to community leaders and saying, how can we help you, in that space that they own. So if it's seniors, fine. So seniors have meals, and let's say a senior organization has Meals on Wheels and friendly visiting, but why can't they look at broadening that and going into a clothing drive, or a virtual art class where you can engage more in a social way, and then engaging with the community to do that. So I think that nonprofits have to move a little bit faster because the world is now moving faster. The world is changing so quickly. I mean, even the gas prices are affecting how organizations are going to run, right? Because people don't want to use their cars anymore. So they don't want to, like they don't want to spend money on the gas. They don't have the money to spend on the gas. So how is an organization going to respond to that? So you've hit it in, the issue becomes, how are leaders of volunteers going to use technology to build both the in-person with the virtual, so you have that hybrid model, be able to move quickly and to be able to respond to what the community needs? And that's a big question to ask.
Mhm.
I also know the board members are leaving left, right, and center. There's a lot of rebuilding happening.
Yeah, there's so much movement, and that's such a good way to put it. Like, you have to act fast, you have to
Yeah.
be flexible, you have to, trust that sometimes, even though decisions don't feel right, you got to make a decision quickly. So there's a lot going on, and it definitely can be overwhelming for organizations who, especially those who, don't feel like they have the time and resources to dedicate um, to so many different things.
Right, but all they have the resources out there. I
Mhm.
mean, they're even, like, again, virtually, there are leaders in businesses that could help with this. That's again a benefit of a virtual program, is that why can't you reach out to a retired CEO of a business that you could actually pose a question to and get some advice from? I'm a firm believer that, put it out there and see what happens, but come up with the ideas and be creative, and don't get stuck in the process. And the volunteer programs are going to have to figure out a way to um, work within their resource means, and that means both financial as well as salary, the human resource as well as the financials. But the one thing about volunteer programs, you know is they're resilient, and they are flexible. And this is really testing the volunteer programs, because I don't think, the traditional model says that a volunteer coordinator is sitting in an office watching their volunteers. Part of the retention of volunteers is seeing them in the hallways, making sure everything's okay, listening to the stories at the water cooler. Well, that stuff's gone. There's no water cooler chat anymore. And that's becoming an issue with employees as well, because that whole, glue that keeps all the stuff together is not there, because you're not getting that soft skill, that kind of soft emotional stuff. So I think volunteer programs have to assess their communities, um, be creative, look at what other organizations are doing, maybe partner up with one particular program, and figure out a way to best support their community in this virtual format.
Mhm. Definitely, it's going to need a lot of collaboration. And for those listening, just a reminder, we will be having time for questions after. So if any questions are popping up, feel free to put them in the Q&A inbox, and we'll make sure to get to them. But I'd love to explore a little more into the specifics of having hybrid programs. What are some best practices? Where can organizations start when they want to start implementing this?
Okay, so I mean, I would say you look at the volunteer management cycle, okay? And so from a best practice model, you have to start with recruitment. Okay. I mean, well, let me walk this back. You have to create the role design. So it starts with coming up with interesting jobs that you think will align well with a hybrid model, where maybe it's either hybrid, which means they come in for a little bit and they go and do things virtually. So maybe they teach a class on site, but then they do tutoring offsite, or mentorship or coaching offsite. Um, so number one, it starts with the role description, and you have to look at the role description, say, is it virtual? Is it hybrid? Is it in person? You're seeing that also with jobs too. With job postings, is it hybrid? Is it virtual? Is it in person? So you have to start with the roles, and you have to look at. Um, I would actually even ask volunteers what they'd be willing to offer up within the organization, because the one thing we're not 100% sure of is what our volunteer skill sets are. So there may be skill sets that we can make use of that we don't even know. So you have to look within first and say, okay, what's open, what's available. And then you have to use your website. You've got to better manage your social media. Okay. And that's where we fall badly. I still look at organizations' websites. I still see the basic stuff. I still see, like, we need you. You can do hybrid, and you can do virtual or in person, but there's no information there. So we have to better use our marketing, and I'm going to call it not recruitment. I'm going to call it marketing, because I think we need to move more into the marketing space and use your social media, your Instagram, your Facebook, your website, and better communicate what the benefits are, what you're looking for, what the value is for the volunteers, because volunteers are very smart. And now they're looking at, with their limited time, what value that they are going to get out of it. How are they going to make a difference? Right? Then you have to look at the volunteer management system and how are you going to manage all this? So again, like I said to you, many of your volunteers you're never going to see now. So how are you going to go through that whole onboarding process? So that screening and onboarding process. So obviously your application form should be online at this point. Your screening should be partially online. Not everybody has access to a lot of data, or a lot of, like, I've actually had volunteers that are very limited as to how much Wi-Fi they have. So you have to be cognizant of that you're not discriminating against people that don't have the resources. So how are you going to go through that screening process, including the application form, the interview process, any of the forms that need to be filled out? All that stuff can be online now. So then the next question is, and from a best practice model is, do you have a volunteer management system? What can you afford? If you're going to go into a virtual space with a lot of volunteers, it may be worth looking into some kind of volunteer management system where the applications go through the system and you can track everything. I know that can be expensive for some organizations, but I think they've come down a lot in price. And I think that there's a lot of capability out there without having to use the old Excel spreadsheets. So that's one area you have to deal with. And then the tracking of the hours is another, big hurdle that you have to look at. Are you sending out emails once a month? Like, how are you going to track the hours if you're not going to see volunteers? So what kind of a system are you going to put in place for that? It could be an email, it could be a Word document that they have to send back, but then you're probably chasing them down. Is there some kind of software that you can use that would allow them to just track their hours? The next area, from a best practice, is you've got to move into a retention / recognition model that you can do online. So I'll give you examples that are happening. Things like badging. So when volunteers do unique things, that they get this badge, which is basically, remember the stars you used to get in kindergarten, the stickers that you got in kindergarten that were huge positive reinforcements. This is just the adult version of that, and I think they're great. I think it's great. I think people want that, they want to feel like they're part of something, and having that recognition, that badging. Education, also move it online. You do a YouTube video, videotape. Your phone can videotape a whole education module, and post it online, and it becomes part of their onboarding process or their retention process. So, again, it's thinking of how you can use technology to keep volunteers engaged, ensure they get the right information, allow them opportunities for feedback. And we have all those tools there. We have SurveyMonkey, we have Zoom, we have polls, we have LinkedIn polls. There's so many things that are available. You could be creating a LinkedIn group just for your volunteers for your organization, and engaging that way, or give them a space that they can talk to each other. You can do, there's Facebook groups. You could do videos where you do group watching. So there's all kinds of ways that you can keep volunteers engaged, but you've got to develop the processes. And if you don't have the tools to develop it, is this not a great opportunity maybe for a volunteer that has those skill sets? So,
yeah,
there's just some thoughts.
There's so much you can do. I know that we also talked about in the past, like whenever I picture volunteer management, I picture a triangle. You got the person organizing everything at the top,
Yeah.
and then maybe you have a few people supporting them, and then you have your volunteers. But I feel like almost that model is being changed so that you're actually having volunteers come in and help train, or you're having more experienced volunteers, actually take on the role of helping you shape how that program operates. So do you think that having this mix will provide an opportunity for more collaboration, like within the actual process itself?
I do. I think I think just because you're not getting paid for something doesn't mean that you don't have the same skill sets. I absolutely do. I think these are great ways to get volunteers involved. I mean, this is this is the foundation of volunteerism. Great organizations were built on the fact that high skilled volunteers got together to do something. So I think there's so much um, brain power out there. Um, Not only just from older people, but also from younger people. Like, okay, well, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Vaccine hunters, a bunch of kids from university graduates saw a problem and solved it within a weekend. Okay. Nobody said, hey, well, they're volunteers. They're not getting paid. It has to, like, we don't have accountability for this. Oh my God, everybody got on board. Like, to me, that is an ideal, like the perfect example of seeing a need, using technology. All they used was Facebook and Instagram. That was it. And they were able to um, mobilize all of Canada. Like, it's insane. So, of course it can be done. It's just that volunteer programs and leaders of volunteers have to think beyond and have to get their leadership on board. So, this is kind of my political advocacy plug, is that start having those conversations with your executive director, because I guarantee you, executive directors are trying to figure out how to move forward too, right? So be part of the change management leadership and not part of the responsive. And do these things that are happening, like colleges are moving to microeducation and badging. Volunteer matching programs. There are sites out there now, including the one that I was working with, the Volunteer Success. It's just gone live, where organizations can post their positions, and volunteers can post their profiles, and Volunteer Success will start that matching process. So there's lots of stuff out there to help you do it, but you got to think beyond a traditional volunteer management process. And even volunteer management education needs to change. It also needs to reflect that, but that's a whole other
Yeah.
topic of conversation.
Oh, that's a whole
you know
conversation on its own for sure.
Wait, but the one thing with I'm going to go back to the basics. The one thing about digital volunteers is, here are the things you have to know, like the real basics. You have to ensure that volunteers feel like they're supported, okay, because they are working off site and they are working alone and isolated. So they have to feel like they're supported and they have to feel like they're heard. So you have to come up with, whether that's a weekly check-in, like, we all have sites that we subscribe to, and you're inundated with little micro bites of education or micro bites of what's happening, what's going on. And I think that's a great tool that nonprofits could be using. Can you picture an organization that just sends out a weekly, highlight of something, or a quick ask, or did you know, to keep volunteers engaged? And at the end of all of those little news bites, there's always, we want to hear from you, and give people an opportunity to engage. And you could have that being filtered through a volunteer. Another issue with digital is, how are you going to keep your volunteers on track? So you will have to come up with a process, and whether that is a monthly form that needs to be sent back as to, what went on that month, or weekly, or just a phone call. And again, you could have volunteer ambassadors making those phone calls to volunteers. So if you go back to when COVID started, and a lot of and I did mention this in the last talk that we had, where a lot of the community-based organizations, churches, synagogues, religious affiliations, took their volunteers and had them call all the congregants, just making sure you're okay. What a lovely thing to do. So you could be doing the same thing with volunteers, where you have a volunteer council, telephone council, that
Mhm.
calls volunteers to check in on a weekly basis with a set of parameters that they're checking in on. Um, you have to still, and it's going to be a little bit harder to build a culture of accountability for volunteers, because one of the risks of going virtual is you cannot manage what they're doing as easily. So it may very well be that your orientation package has to change. How many volunteer coordinators have revised their orientation manual to respond to digital, you
Mhm.
know, best practices on Facebook, what you can and cannot do. You can't take a logo of the organization, put it under your signature, those types of things. So there has to be a bit more accountability. Um, for all of us who have worked virtually for the last 2 years, it's not about a bum and seat, but it's about what have you accomplished. So I think organizations are not so concerned about how many hours you're doing, but whether you're able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And then another challenge that I find, I guess it's a an opportunity and um, a challenge, and that is, how are you going to grow your volunteer leadership? How do you identify talent when you're doing most of your work virtually? So if your interviewing is going virtual, how do you get volunteers to help take on more complex roles, right? And I think that's kind of like that big giant takeaway.
Mhm.
If we're going to go into a hybrid model, and we're going to go into a volunteer virtual model, is I think we need to give volunteers more responsibility in many ways, and allow them to do some unique skill-based things. And then you have to look at that from okay, so what does that mean to a student? What does that mean to a university graduate? What does that mean to a retired professional, and everything in between? You just have to look at those kinds of groups. Um, I think that engaging the internal conversation is very important first. You can't do this on your own. So who's involved in this conversation? You may have to do a bit of a soapbox preaching, and here's an example of what you can do. Why don't you create a video on the value of virtual volunteering and send it out to all your staff? Like, just unique things that you can be doing. You need to involve your leadership and your colleagues, because you're not going to be able to do this alone. So that's something that we have to look at and understand where your organization is now, where it wants to go, and how are they connected to other organizations, and what can you build from that.
Oh, yeah, there's so much to consider. I'm really curious because we've been talking a lot about the younger generation, seeing university students really take charge with the example you provided, and also reaching like an international audience.
Yeah,
So I'm curious to hear a little bit more. Do you think that these are two audiences that are going to play a key role in like digital volunteering in that experience?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the younger generation, I have two kids in their 20s. Um, they're constantly on their phone. It's little tiny snippets of information, to the point where I'll call out to my son and say, "Hey, Matthew," he won't answer. So I text him, and he responds immediately. So, like, seriously, like, I think that the younger generation has so much potential um, to not just help out, but I think to lead um, in new projects. The issue is going to be is how are you going to engage them, and are you engaging them, in high school? Are you engaging them in university colleges? Are you engaged? Are they telling you what they want to do? So, again, there's no clear answer other than making that phone call or sending an email and having that conversation with groups, because it all starts with a leader, or a small group of people who say, "Hey, let's go do something," and then all of a sudden there's a large group of people because they told people. So, from the younger generation, I think it's digital is important. Like, virtual volunteering is important, but I also don't discount them getting together. they're social beings. And I don't think that they want to just do things virtually. I think they're the perfect example of a hybrid, where they're doing some stuff together and then off they go virtually and doing something. I think they're a perfect example of an audience that would value hybrid. The international one, I think it's a new world for us. I mean, it opens up a humongous amount of opportunity, but it also opens up a humongous amount of competition. So internationally, I think that, I would not want to take away from other countries' resources, but on the other hand, I think from a skill-based model, I think there's some great opportunities there. So whether it's tutoring, teaching, mentoring, teaching courses online, as examples, artists teaching. So there's like, in California, there's this I think it started in California, the master class, where all these professionals are teaching these snippet micro education courses. So that I see really being a great opportunity for international volunteering. Is kind of like a masterclass concept.
Oh, totally. Just
some
having
thoughts.
an online bank of information and having
Yep.
wanting people to have access to it.
Yeah. So I think when you go international, I think you really are. My first, if I would say low-hanging fruit, is skills, experience, known by reputation, and somebody that can share something or teach something, or have something that you can't, that is easier gotten by going international. The other thing is there's also this partnership thing. So something could be grassroots in Toronto, but then have a counterpart in Australia, right? So if you're doing things, that a movement, or I was just actually reading something about Dress for Success. It's looking for volunteers to do, they're getting a plug for me, to do career training, right? And so I guess they have a program that they developed. Well, that may be an opportunity for Dress for Success to find a sister program in another country that could help out. Therefore, geography is not an issue because it's all done through virtual.
Amazing. Oh yeah, there's so much you can do, and it totally expands. Just like the amount of knowledge you have, is insane when you open it online.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to leave.
And you know what? And
oh,
sorry, I was going to say.
Oh, there you go.
And it's not even the knowledge; it's just the curiosity.
Yeah. Oh, totally. There's it's just opportunity, I feel like, is the key word when it comes to having that dual online and in-person model, because there's just you can get really creative with how specific you want to get with each.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I wanted to open up the floor to questions in case anyone has any. So I'll leave a few minutes just in case, but to give people some time to think. How can our audience get in contact with you if they want to ask you anything? They come up with anything after the call.
So they can email me at Lori Gotlieb Consulting @gmail.com. They can reach out on LinkedIn. They can, I don't really do my Instagram. I have a website which has a lot of my articles, my presentations. I do a lot of workshopping, a lot of presentations, a lot of customized work. So Lori Gotlieb Consulting.wordpress.com. If they email me, I'm happy to give them my phone number. Like I said, I always come from that world that if anybody has a question that wants to take it off of a presentation or webinar, feel free to reach out to me. So if you email me, then I'm happy to give you my phone number. I'm not going to put it in a recording.
Of course, totally fair. Well, I'm not seeing any questions come up. So before we head out today, are there any final thoughts, anything you'd like to leave our audience with on the topic of hybrid volunteering and the future of volunteerism?
Yeah, so a few things. So, be creative. Look at what you've built, what your foundation is, your best practices. So, all that paperwork that you have, the manual, that book of all your policies, procedures. So you've got to, start at the basics. Let's start with what needs to be sorry, revised or changed based on what's gone on with the pandemic or moving into a hybrid virtual space. So you got to put your ducks in a row. So look at your roles and look at your risk management side of things. And then ask volunteers, like send out a survey of how do you feel that you could give back to this organization, and so look at what volunteers want to give back as feedback, and then go to your leadership and have that conversation. Get the buy-in from the top that you want to build a hybrid model or a virtual model, as well as a foundational one, and be creative. Talk to your colleagues, keep the conversation going.
Of course. Well, thank you again, Lori, for joining us, as it is
always a pleasure.
Today. Yeah, it's great having you on. You always give the best advice. For those listening, I will have linked all of the resources we've discussed in this webinar. There will be a replay available afterwards. So in the comment section of that webinar, I will make sure to put everything from Lori's website to how you can connect with Lori and Driven on LinkedIn. I'll also link Volunteer Success if you guys want to have take advantage of that resource, as well as our past interviews. So thank you again for listening, and thank you again, Lori, for sharing.
My pleasure. Good luck to everybody. The other thing I was going to say is also look at volunteer management systems. I did some work with Better Impact, and they also have a really good program in terms of their volunteer management system, which involves you can build the applications online. They go, they go into the system and right into the organization, and you can start the process. So there's lots of good programs out there. Yeah, I know that's something that can help volunteer programs, but also can be a challenge financially. Mm-hmm. So looking at what resources are already out there that can help you out.
Oh, totally. And if you are looking for a new volunteer management system, Driven also has an option available. So I'll have a link to that available as well, because we also make sure to have everything digital to help streamline that process. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time on the podcast. Stay safe.